You probably can't get away from ever hearing the simple fact that getting old sucks. It's not like I have personal experience going through like a midlife crisis or arthritis. Hell, I'm only turning 20 later this year. Though this doesn't change the fact that I can throw out some rambling about what it might mean to grow for me and others beyond this point, both in the physical and, most important, mental way. It'd also be important to analyze the connection between the two in this sense, but overall, I think it'd be good to sort of visualize the process and whether or not you really are going to become just like your Peepaw and Meemaw. Before that though, my obviously not real name is Wet Spork, and while I'm no expert in any literature in any regard, I can talk senseless shit for a while, so get ready for that. I think that for today's question to you, I'll ask you this. What instrument is the coolest instrument to play? And while I'm going to clock that the saxophone probably came to mind, I'd like to hear what you have to say anyway. To actually start our little session here, I think it'd be best to likely cover birth to adulthood, considering this period is going to be likely the most influential period, as well as the one with the most physical and mental changes. I mean, also not to mention that most people tend to grow up before they're old, so while I don't have a scholarly source to back that, I'm going to begin there. Oh yeah, I'm totally not throwing this in between my script here because I figured out it would be awkward to put anywhere else, but before we discuss development, it's important I establish how interconnected the mental and physical can be. The two are heavily intertwined. I mean, your brain is something physical in and of itself. When your physical state is poor, your mental state is severely affected and can follow suit. When your mental state is poor, it can have adverse effects on your physical state as well, even just by the stress or feelings alone. It could be something as simple as being hungry that puts you into a negative state, or maybe more complex, like a nutrient deficiency, which chronically assists in perpetuating depressive symptoms. Hormones and other such chemical messengers play a big part as well. I mean, they can directly affect the functions which affect your mentality or physical states, which can then, in a chain-like effect, reach your mental state. Puberty might be an easy example, especially involving the hormones, but it's also important when keeping age in mind how growing into an older and weaker body or the stress involved might affect a person's mental state in turn. Either way, let's actually start with growing up now. It's needless to say that in many capacities, you're likely to be a much different person at 20 than you were at 10 or 2. I mean, not only are you no longer playing on the playground and sucking your thumb, I mean, maybe you still are, and for that do your thing, I guess, unless you're like a predator, but you're pretty much at the peak of your growth and paying taxes when you're 20. You're maybe not as hyper anymore, hopefully more mature, and capable of much more complex thought than was possible before. Puberty, with the involvement of several hormonal processes, quite literally did and continues to influence your daily life and mental functions through chemical messengers. At the end of it though, while you certainly did adapt rigid parts of your character throughout childhood, you're most likely still a good learner and quite receptive to new information. Alright, so the more focal point of this video is going to be how we get from this receptive and bright young chap to Peepaw who might be clinging on a tad too hard to the pre-1964 days. And trust me, I'm the people's man, and by the people's man, I mean I'm not a fucking doctor or a psychologist, so we're going to speculate, and I mean speculate in its raw form. I'm going to say that when I talk about how we sort of gradually lose the willingness and ability to change, that this isn't some cold hard truth. It's still possible to change, and I do think that even in the smallest ways, people continue to change throughout their lives simply by living them. But I think we could agree that the vast majority of people generally lose their cultural and social adaptability as they grow older. I'll pull out my old friend Desmond here for the visualization, but it should seem natural that it's much easier to change a young person's perspective on something than a person considerably older. I think that the main component for this rigidity often just ends up being a general fatigue, both mentally and physically, alongside the fact that mentally there are qualities these people have ingrained in themselves that have become routine and focal parts of their lives. For a young person, their body is fresh and they're not exactly pained by the burden of existence like that of those older than them. They're also in a fresh period of mental observation. They've just come from a period of rapid change and have finally found themselves in a sort of stable position where they can explore ideologies and find what they think is best. But now these adopted ideologies aren't something always so easily dropped or picked up, not subject to rapid and diverse change as it was in early life. People usually, over time of course, find for themselves what they generally tend to believe in, and over several years, should it carry them that far, engrave that sort of lifestyle into themselves, never to be completely rid of. Not only do we find what is comfortable and routine within our lives and try to stick to it, but getting older also simply means that with the fatigue comes a harder time trying to even process all of what is new. I mean, I say we there, like, my bad, I'm not quite an unk yet, but I don't exactly think my analysis there is anything grossly inapplicable. Overall, I feel like a lot of this rigidity develops from a mental place where people become fatigued from change, and rather than trying to take on something new, especially if it's amazingly different from what someone has spent their whole life growing accustomed to, something like putting a Vietnam War vet in a furry convention, they simply reject it and stick to what they know. I'm not exactly trying to justify why some older people will constantly work against themselves in the name of some old ideal they cling on to. I guess in a way I wanted to sort of portray how it sort of ends up this way, or at the very least try to make an understanding of how it might come to be. Like I said before, just because it's gotten quite a bit harder to move, both physically and mentally, it's not like it's impossible, and the reality is that there will be 20-year-olds more opposed to change than an 80-year-old. I think that the best way to go about making these changes, at least assuming they're beneficial, is to portray them to the person in a way which is as interconnected as possible to what they already have a strong belief in, like helping someone get into a new exercise by convincing them it will allow them to build muscle more efficiently. Of course, some people just don't change and don't have any desire to either, and trust me, I know some both young and old, but for the sake of this video, mostly old. I don't think that the stubborn quality, in spite of the frustration that can often come for those with it and those around it, is entirely bad from a broad perspective. I feel that in some way, older generations can serve as a sort of cultural anchor in society that remind people of not just what once was, but act as a resistant force to potentially harmful future ideologies, and can represent a force to turn back towards for younger generations in those times. In the cases when perhaps they are the ones who harbor those harmful ideologies, they can serve as a reminder of what was learned and how to best avoid the propagation of similar ones. It's not really always black and white, and sometimes it's pretty damn simple when Graham is perhaps a little too disrespectful to a waiter with dyed hair, but sometimes you gotta look at the bright side, right? Anyways, I think that's about all I have to say for now, so age gracefully and stay wet.